Thank you. My name is Richard Stevenson, and I lead the law firm practice group across the Asia-Pacific region. I am joined today by experts across our advisory business, including workplace, research, and in-country tenant representation teams, so to offer insights around the legal workplace and trends we anticipate across the region. Whilst Asia-Pacific has rebounded relatively quickly from the pandemic, and with most corporates showing a healthy appetite to return to the office, the legal sector faces unique challenges, and CBRE are of the opinion COVID has acted as a catalyst in terms of partnerships rethinking traditional ways of working, with staff mobility and a more digitally fluent workforce at the forefront of these changes.
Dear all, thank you for having me today. After a chaotic year of 2020, I think everyone is looking for a new start in 2021 and the end of the pandemic. The economic recovery is happening. In Asia Pacific, the largest economy, Mainland China, has escaped from the recession in 2020 with a full-year growth of 2.3%. We believe the Chinese economy will grow at 8.7% this year, and this will do a lot in stabilizing the overall regional economy this year. We are happy to see that many of the markets in the region stopped economic contraction in Q3 2020 and expected to resume to pre-COVID level in the second half of 2021. Overall, we are quite positive in terms of the economic picture in Asia Pacific. However, this recovery is still dependent on the COVID-19 situation. There is good control of COVID situation in many parts of Asia Pacific, particularly in the Greater China area, Pacific, and Singapore in particular. However, like India, they are now having the second wave with the cases much higher than the first wave in 2020. Situation in the Philippines is also not yet stabilized as well. Another drawback is about the vaccination in Asia Pacific, in fact, is lagging behind the United States and United Kingdom. Singapore is the most outperforming market with almost 20% of the population already got the vaccine. Mainland China is also moving up very quickly at 10%, but rest of the region is slower than previously planned in terms of getting the vaccine. Another factor we are looking into is the government stimulus measures. In 2020, the governments in Asia Pacific pulled together about 15% of the GDP into supporting the overall economy, but many of these measures are going to be ended in this year. However, we think that the overall situation will still be very accommodative to the early recovering economy. Zooming into the legal sector in this region, I think many markets are showing the resilience in this sector. Take Hong Kong as an example. Even the overall unemployment rate is increasing, the total employment for legal and accounting services actually grew by 1.1% during 2020. There are also mild growth in China, Australia, Japan, and Singapore. The leasing volume by business services companies dropped by 9% in 2020, but this compared to 30% drop for the overall leasing market in Asia Pacific. Turning to 2021, we saw the huge improvement in leasing sentiment since January on the back of the increase in site inspections and leasing enquiries. Markets that saw the strongest improvements are Singapore and Australia. While Japan remains weak in the leasing market, the sentiment is gradually recovering. Overall, Asia Pacific remains as the tenants market and the rents are still relatively soft. So it is an opportunity for occupiers to evaluate the portfolios and start looking for options before the market have full recovery. Another major consideration is about the rethinking of occupiers' real estate strategy. Essentially, before COVID-19, the corporate real estate strategies were largely depending on the business and headcount growth, which was largely a linear process. But in the future, the strategies around business, workforce, workplace, and real estate are much more interlinked with each other and affect the decisions one to another. Occupiers will have to rethink about the better design and experience in their workplace, increasing their flexibility in their overall portfolios. The location could be more dispersed, and the people-centric office will be a major consideration among the talents. For this, we've also asked over 100 occupiers in Asia Pacific about what they are thinking. For the leaders, about 70% of the people are expecting their employees to return back to the office with some sort of flexible working environment, and also rethinking of the replace design. This hybrid work model will be prevailing in the future. From our survey, only less than 20% of the employees will be allowed to work remotely and spend most of the time outside the office. For most of them, office-based working will remain as the norm, but they still have the options to work outside the office. Therefore, we don't expect a substantial impact of the overall office demand in the future for Asia Pacific. Having said that, the risk of the office market in Asia Pacific still lies on the supply and demand fundamentals. Essentially, many markets are still in construction boom, and the delay of projects in 2020 is going to push the supply this year. We expect about 2/3 of our markets will see the vacancy hover at 10-year high. India, China remain to face the high supply pressure. There are two exceptions in the region. They are Taipei and Tokyo, with vacancy at 3% level or even lower. So what does it mean for rents? We had three major rental downward cycles in the past 2 decades: SARS, the global financial crisis, and the current COVID-19 pandemic. However, the rental decline during the COVID-19 is in fact much milder than that during the global financial crisis. Overall, our markets are much more mature. The current downward cycle already lasts for 5 quarters, compared to 6 quarters during the global financial crisis. We are expecting a more prominent stabilization and recovery to take place in the second half of this year. Singapore and Australian markets are expected to be the first to restore the rental growth. While in Hong Kong, they will lose the place as the most expensive office market globally, but this also provides opportunities for tenants to regain renegotiation power, particularly in the core locations. I hope you find the sharing by me useful and insightful. Thank you very much.
In the era of COVID-19, the legal workplace is on the cusp of major transformation. Couple this with the fact that the fastest growing cost category in law firms today is technology. More companies are investing in software that will automate their work processes. Specifically for workplace, trends that predated the pandemic have now been accelerated by new ways of working and greater cost for change. The legal industry has long favored an in-office culture, one that ensures easy access to people and resources and manages time and productivity through a physical presence. The pre-COVID status quo, therefore, demanded heavy in-office attendance for legal firms, especially during core business hours. The impact of COVID-19 on the legal industry's acceptance of working away from the office cannot be understated. It would be exceedingly difficult for law firms to convince employees to revert to full-time work from the office now that they have experienced remote working. This happens to be a fact across all sectors. A recent survey done by CBRE of more than 180 law firm clients found that 72% of the respondents believe all of their attorneys and staff will have a degree of flexibility to work remotely, even beyond the pandemic. 75% of our survey respondents would consider a mobile strategy to share space, free addressing, rather than having dedicated offices. 58% predict that 3 years from now, COVID-19 will have had a significant impact on the future workplace. None of our respondents said that nobody would work remotely in the future. The primary concern for those who remain wary of remote working is how to measure productivity when employees are out of sight. However, it is now widely accepted that this is not the best measure of productivity. Common measures of productivity may include things like revenue hours billed, as well as less direct measures such as talent retention or employee engagement. However, this does not for sure take away the importance of the physical space that plays an important part in building brand, culture, and employee engagement. While some degree of remote working will take place, law firms will need to keep a culture that facilitates physical interaction and mentoring. The legal work environment of the future will need to balance competing desires for mobility, collaboration, privacy, and flexibility.
Decentralization is yet to feature as a trend in Singapore. Over the past 10 years, few high-quality decentralized office developments have completed. However, some recent examples include the Metropolis to the west in Buena Vista and Paya Lebar Quarter, an integrated office, retail and residential development to the east. Whilst the early movers have enjoyed steep discounts in exchange for anchoring these developments, stabilised rents in each location no longer deliver a significant delta to incentivise migration outside of the central business district. The majority of multinational law firms situated in Singapore have a footprint size of between 10,000 square feet to 40,000 square feet. Only 2 domestic firms occupy space that exceeds 100,000 square feet in size, which is commonly regarded as the threshold size for considering split locations, given a loss in efficiency when smaller footprints are separated. Singapore is currently behind the curve when it comes to the adoption of activity-based working in the legal sector. There is huge potential for workplace-led initiatives to create productivity gains, enhanced employee engagement, and bottom-line savings. The COVID-19 situation in Singapore and the impact on the workplace remains fluid. Singapore, as a regional hub, sees a once highly mobile workforce now grounded. Some firms have ramped up their agile working capabilities to support remote working for their Singapore-based employees, both on the island as well as for those that have temporarily moved to other time zones. In the medium term, we will see a greater adoption of activity-based working and further investment in technology to support remote work. As opposed to hub and spoke or multi-site strategies, we will likely see more core and flex solutions and activity-based working initiatives that will deliver law firms in Singapore with the flexibility to manage real estate costs based on actual consumption. Don't be surprised to see one or more international law firms in Singapore implementing a core and flex strategy in 2021.
Hi. Firstly, let me provide a degree of perspective on legal sector occupancy in Hong Kong. The total Grade A office stock in Hong Kong Island is around 45 million square foot, with law firms occupying some 2.5 million square foot of this, or roughly 3% of the total. Until 2018, the vast majority of this 2.5 million square foot was located in our prime CBD district of Central, where average rents are typically among the highest in the world at around US $180 per square foot per annum. However, since 2018, law firms have started moving east to Island East or Quarry Bay, some 20 minutes driving time or 7 subway stops away from Prime Central. They have bypassed our entire mid-markets of Wan Chai and Causeway Bay in the process. In many cases, these moves were driven by a need to upgrade office layouts into a more modern building, but the main driver was undoubtedly cost saving. But relocations east have slowed down in the past 12 months as law firms have been analysing the impact of COVID on their occupancy needs. The reality is that a thriving IPO market plus advisory services around compliance for US companies in China has meant that many law firms are as busy as they have ever been, and profits are higher as a result. The uncertainty comes from an inability to predict when, if ever, a full complement of staff will return to normal working ways. COVID has contributed to a huge reduction in office demand, particularly in our CBD, which has placed downward pressure on rents. It is now some 30% less expensive to lease office space in Central than previously, hence law firms appear more inclined to renew leases and restack current space than to relocate. This may change in 2022 when Swire's new 1 million square foot 2 Taikoo Place completes in Island East, providing law firms with a new modern large floor plate well-priced option as an alternative to staying in Central. The opportunity to build a modern office with less emphasis on the typically cellular design of legal offices may be compelling, and the price discount remains attractive, hence it will be interesting to see how things pan out over the next 12 to 24 months. That said, many law firms continue to believe that Central is the only place to be, and with some predicting lucrative years ahead, this may influence a decision to avoid change. Ultimately, the decision will depend on the firm. Proximity to clients, the law courts, etc. remains important to many. The cost benefits of a move east are very obvious, but the impact on overall business performance is far more difficult to determine. Perhaps the most likely trend for the time being will be lease renewals unless a drastic reconfiguration of space is required. Finally, although there has been plenty of talk about agile environments, collaboration, open plan and the like, the reality is that the vast majority of law firms still retain the traditional cellular layout style. The major change has been a reduction in the size of individual partner offices and increased office sharing by associates. Many firms have looked into the possibility of splitting operations, but only a few have done so, and the preference remains a single site where possible. In summary, questions remain over occupancy post-COVID, and in truth, it's impossible to predict likely impact at this stage, though it has been suggested that 3 years from now, major law firms will require around 30% less space than current as a result of new practices, which of course include work from home. On the positive side, very few law firms have actually reduced footprint in recent years, and Hong Kong looks set to remain a critically important location for international law firms well into the future.
In recap of the entire market, the majority of foreign law firms have been located in core central locations. Shanghai, over the next few years, is under a big new peak supply trend. And we're going to be seeing roughly about 5 million square meters of new grade A office stock entering the market. The majority, about 90% of that 5 million square meters of office stock is located in non-central core locations. So for many of our clients, law firm clients, they've been considering some of these areas. Some key interests that have been shown in Qintan, which is a great location in the free trade zone in Shanghai. Roughly about 50% lower rents have been achievable in this area than traditionally in core Lujiazui, and also the northern North Bund area have seen lots of interest. Shanghai has one of the world's largest metro lines, and there's over 5 new lines entering the market. So these key emerging markets, non-central locations, will be a key interest for foreign law firms moving forward, basically looking to upgrade quality and lower costs. That's a great question, and it's one that we get a lot from our U.S. and European clients. In Shanghai and China, we've been lucky that the majority of our law firm clients have been able to be back into the office, be back in the work since April 2020. But really the key trend has been less on remote working and workplace strategy and more on right-sizing operations for the staff. Over the last 12 to 16 months, we've worked with a handful of law firms to evaluate their size, their footprint and their head count, and to help them right-size that operation for the staff and the revenue that they're entering.
The Tokyo office market has had a very unique reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic, whereby both demand and vacancy have not been as adversely affected as they have in many other Asia-Pacific markets. Particularly amongst law firms, we see a continued demand for the quality, convenience, and proximity to corporate Japan that comes with locating in the CBD submarkets of Marunouchi and Otemachi. As such, we are not seeing decentralization be a very pronounced trend. What we are seeing certainly is an intense focus on cost savings, but the approach most law firms are taking is to consider reduction in footprint rather than alternate submarket locations or hub-and-spoke models to achieve these savings. This trend is certainly more pronounced amongst the international law firms, whereas the domestic law firms have actually been bullish on space. Some even recently acquired additional premises in the CBD to bolster their presence.
Tokyo has seen a very encouraging trend of law firms taking a close look at their workplace strategy, work styles, and profile of staff. A couple of years ago, one of the Magic Circle firms shifted their Tokyo office to fully agile, but the trend slowed for a few years. COVID-19 has certainly forced law firms into remote work, and many are now strongly considering the flexibility that agile occupancy solutions provide. Together with our workplace strategy team, we are supporting several domestic and international firms with reimagining their Tokyo footprint. While no two firms are exactly the same, this trend to proactively modernize the use of space by very traditional Bengoshi of Japan will continue.
Whilst leasing transaction volumes were subdued across 2020 in Pacific, we did still see law firms undertaking various transactions in the second half of the year, and those transactions were still demonstrating that law firms have been gravitating towards premium grade buildings. Since the onset of COVID-19, we have seen firms implement various agile ways of working, which has included introducing 5-day fortnights for some of their business services functions, and also providing legal professionals with much more flexibility to choose when and where they work. However, what we have started to see is increasingly law firms are encouraging their senior practitioners to come back into the office. And that's really to help mentor junior staff and really develop the culture of the firm. What we haven't seen is firms introducing a hub and spoke based model whereby they're decentralizing out of the city. And this is not a phenomenon that we anticipate will emerge over the medium term. So it's true that law firms around the world have been much slower than other industries to evolve the way in which they use their office space. Having said that though, Australian law firms have been early adopters, with the first Australian firms implementing activity-based working as early as 2015. So whilst the long-term implications of COVID-19 are still relatively unknown in terms of the impact it will have on the office sector, what we have started to see is 4 key trends emerging. The first is around providing flexibility and diversity in the types of workspaces that employees have to use. The second is that individual offices are becoming increasingly scarce, and they're not something that we anticipate that firms will continue to provide their partners. Thirdly, most firms are moving towards providing workspaces that are much more akin to those spaces you would see in the financial services and professional services sector. So think much more open plan, potentially activity-based working, but still maintaining a high focus on good quality client and front of house areas. And the fourth factor is that firms are still wanting their staff and their clients to come inside their offices. And so because of that, we think that firms will continue to invest in providing high quality workplaces for their people and their clients.
Whilst the gateway cities across Asia Pacific are all experiencing different market dynamics from a workplace and occupancy perspective, we look to address not only what we are currently experiencing, but what we believe will drive change as partnerships adjust in a post-COVID world to attract and retain top talent.